it's not just about, implementing some anti-piracy tools and then hope the problem will go away. It is effectively a change in the business strategy.
Welcome everyone to another edition of Streaming Made Easy. This week I'm bringing you an expert on piracy and cybersecurity, Lau Zuydervelt from Irdeto. We're going to be talking about piracy. So Irdeto is one of the partners of Streaming Made Easy Dive, taking place on September 11th in Amsterdam, the day before IBC starts. And I wanted to bring Lau to talk about piracy because I feel it has taken kind of a backseat these last few years. It's all about building a D2C streaming vehicle. That's fine and dandy. But in the meantime, there's still a lot of piracy going on. And so the questions, are numerous, what's the impact? What can we do about it? What's coming next, etc. And so without further ado, let me bring on Lau. Super nice meeting you. Welcome.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you for having me.
So tell me a bit more about what you do at Irdeto to set the scene. Are you an expert on piracy?
Sure. I'm Lau Zuydervelt. I am the Solutions Director at Irdeto with a particular focus of looking at our anti-piracy and cybersecurity services that we offer to our customers. And indeed, I've been doing this for quite a while, so I've seen the kind of change in trends and piracy over the years.
Nice. Well, so Let's have a bit of a chat. Do you know how much content was pirated in 2024? Just to get us started, just to give us a sense of the scale of the challenge.
Yeah, it's quite difficult to put a number on it. So if you read the research articles that's been published, it definitely ranges into the billions of US dollars. There are some estimates that go over 50 billion US dollars that it's led to losses or revenue losses for in the industry. Of course, it is quite difficult to put a number on it because even if piracy did not happen, it is difficult to estimate how many of those people will subscribe to the legitimate platforms. There's a lot of market dynamics at play, and if somebody's not consuming it from a pirate source, it doesn't necessarily mean they have the means to actually subscribe to the legitimate platforms or the availability even in some regions or territories.
So that's the impact from a financial standpoint. But in terms of the number of pirates or pirated programs, anything you can share on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we've seen from the statistics is by far the biggest share of it is series content, so TV series particularly.
Interesting.
There's been a large increase in the popularity of anime content, so we do see a big increase on anime piracy around the world. Various reasons. Again, as I mentioned before, it's not necessarily available on the particular platforms that customers are subscribing to because it is a new trend. But apart from that, your popular series still remains quite popular in the piracy sites and forums. Apart from that, of course, movies, box office movies tend to still be very pirated. And then, of course, live sports content. So there's always a demand for live sports content.
And so how do you see any trends, dynamics per region, meaning that, in markets where perhaps we're more in a mobile first environment, less big screen TV experience, or just, in terms of the available, money to actually subscribe to, XYZ subscription services, what are you seeing at a global level from, one continent to the other?
Yes, absolutely. So those market dynamics play a certain big role in piracy trends. What we see is with the rollout of faster mobile connectivity, so 4G, 5G, that did have a big impact on piracy as a whole over especially the last couple of years. Before that, it was typically broadband penetration. As the rollout of broadband into the households, piracy increased, but those were mostly in territories where people were consuming content at home. Now, of course, with mobile connectivity, that bandwidth has made it available to the mass audience in anywhere. Really, It doesn't have to necessarily be at home. And then particularly in live sports, that's a big factor because people do want to consume it. They do want to watch the content during the live event itself, which means that they're not necessarily home at that time. So they do want to consume it anyway.
And so what do we know about pirates? Because there's historically, and we spoke about that as we were prepping for this. You had this commercial or, infomercial about, would you steal a car? Would you steal XYZ? So it was very much, we were trying to paint pirates a certain way, but we chatted and you said that actually even, folks who actually have a subscription, whether that's Netflix or others, will or can actually pirate content on the sites. That it's not just, legit subscribers versus pirates. It's not as clear cut.
Yeah, correct. Absolutely. So there's a big perception that you're either a legitimate customer and you will subscribe to all the content that you want to watch, to all the platforms. On the other hand, you have people that pirate. They don't subscribe to anything and they just pirate content and consume the pirate platforms. And that is a bit of a misconception, because there's a broad share of the market which are hybrid pirate users. So they will subscribe to a legitimate platform. They want the reliability, they want the quality, they want the availability of the content. The content that they mainly watch, they will subscribe to. And then because of subscription fatigue, they will then subscribe to pirate platforms or watch free content on pirate platforms to kind of fill the areas that are secondary to their normal viewing. So those hybrid users I think that's a big portion of the market, unfortunately.
So what's interesting is that means that the SVOD stacking amongst the SVOD that you stack, you may actually stack, a couple of, pirated subscription in the mix. So any numbers that we're seeing are, legit SVOD stacking subscription. What you're saying is that, folks, is that common? Or is it a portion of people, right? I mean, if you look at pirates as a whole, do you have any insights as to how it's broken down? Like, those who are, only pirates will only be pirating content. Those who do that hybrid approach, like you were describing.
Most of the people wouldn't cut their subscriptions off and just immediately move to piracy. They typically, what we see is that people are, they're unsure if it's going to meet all the demands that they have in the household. So what they tend to do is they try it out. They've heard from a friend or they heard from, somebody at the office or, and then they're willing to try the pirate services to see if it's reliable. And typically what happens is there's not a lot of loyalty. So when it comes to pirate subscription service, because of the reliability, so people will try one service and they will find that, it's perhaps not very reliable. Of course, with our anti-piracy campaigns and efforts that we do, we also try to make it not as reliable. So if we of course shut down some of the streams that people are watching, it causes that unreliability, especially in live sports. And what people will then do is they will shift to a second service or third service until they find something that kind of close to fill all the gaps they have. Once they have that, then the problem, of course, is if they become really comfortable using the pirate services, then they might switch completely to pirate consumption. But that is a smaller part of the market, right? There are some people that just refuse to pay for any particular content. So that is a big risk to the industry.
What I'm hearing is some of the root causes for piracy. So of course, you can't find the content that you want on any of the platforms. Therefore, and you mentioned anime. I'm quite surprised actually, because I feel like, between a Crunchyroll, which is very anime focused, and all of the investment from folks like Netflix or Prime, that this would have changed. But I guess maybe there's never enough, right? Because none of the players are carrying everything that is on the horizon. But so what I'm hearing is that there's that, fragmentation and limitation to what people are prepared to pay. What else? Are you seeing anything else? Is there anything regarding the UI and the UX? Because we keep saying that it's so hard to find content. Is it easier to find content and pirate it?
Yes, if you look at 15 years ago on pirate and IPTV applications, there wasn't a lot of effort being spent on the UI and what that particular pirate application looks like. Even on the advertisements that you've seen for piracy platforms back then, you could easily tell whether it's a pirate subscription or a legitimate offering. So the average consumer could distinguish between the two. What has since happened, in the last couple of years is that pirates have focused a lot on redesigning their UIs to make it more professional, to make it more a slicker user experience. And now we see that customers often have quite a difficult time to distinguish on what is a piracy platform and what is a legitimate offering.
Unbelievable.
There's even payment providers that's now been integrated into the piracy platform. So if people then navigate to those sites and they see that there's the common credit card schemes and the payment platforms that are being supported, the consumers often say, well, this has to be legitimate, right? Yeah. Because otherwise, how would they get these mechanisms and means of payment on their platforms? So that is a worrying trend, and we have a lot of consumers that just, they subscribe to platforms not even knowing that it's a pirate service that they are subscribing to.
And so how do you explain, so is that me, but this feeling that, it took a back seat, it's less prominent, let's talk about than maybe it was 15 years ago? Is that because, companies are focused on, building those digital, entertainment hubs to fight piracy? But is that enough to do just that? I'm thinking the answer is no. So how do you feel, streamers and broadcasters, how do they envision piracy? What are they doing about it?
I think it became quite difficult to compete with pirate services as the quality started to increase, and those professional looking sites that we spoke about and the ease of payment to be able to subscribe to those services. I think it became quite difficult for operators and broadcasters to start competing on that. So the businesses tend to focus on what they can compete with, and those are other legitimate platforms.
Yeah.
The problem with that is that the market share is getting less and less. If you have those consumers that move to the hybrid approach, there's already a lot of the subscriptions that they stop paying. Because they do get those services, which are the secondary viewing. It's not their primary viewing, but they are getting that from the pirate services. If they then further move away and cut the cord completely and go to the pirate services, then that of course is a customer that will be lost. So for those legitimate operators and broadcasters, the market share is getting smaller and smaller. So even though they compete with each other, in the long term, they're going to have to look at how they can compete against the piracy offering. And that's quite difficult, right? Because often those piracy services are ad-based, so they are free to consumers, but obviously consumers need to click through a bunch of ads. But there are things, from a reliability standpoint, from availability on a various range of devices. When it comes to the search and recommendation, those things are very important to the consumer.
Yeah.
So it's not just the content offering. You can also look at what else do the piracy platforms in my particular area, what do they have, and how can I then compete with that content? And as we mentioned before, if it's specific content that's not available on the legitimate platform, then it's definitely a sign to start acquiring that content, to have it available on a platform. Because if it's not there, if it's not available in the region, we've seen this in many regions around the world. If a particular piece of content is not there, but people talk about it on social media, the world is much more connected now. So people do read it and they do catch the hype of a particular series or movie. If it's not available, they will pirate it 100%. So it is important to take that into account as well.
But so the question is, what can you do about it? It very much feels like, when one service is, shut down, another 10, I'm exaggerating, I'm French, but are popping up. So how can you convince, those players to actually invest? Because the first question they're going to have for you is, what's the ROI? How much is that going to cost me? What's going to be the impact? Will I see the impacts directly, or is it just, at the industry level?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a conversation that often comes up on the ROI, but I think it's important to understand, look, there are lots of anti-piracy tools and methods available where you can try to, one is platform-based, where you can look at the content and things like that. But of course, you can also do deploy a lot of anti-piracy measures to try to limit the amount of piracy that happens. But the first step is always to understand what that landscape looks like, right? Not all of those tools will have the same effect in various parts of the world, or not all the tools are even available in all parts of the world. So it's important to do a landscape, to have a look at specifically what's happening in the particular region that the operator is basically available in, and then assess all the different piracy tools that can be implemented, and to assess the impact that they will have, and then deploy those. If a operator want to deploy or have available all of the anti-piracy techniques, it will become very expensive. Not just from a licensing perspective, but also from the cost and infrastructure on running it. So it's always important. So we would always recommend that our customers start with that first. Do a threat assessment, a landscape report, And then based on that, we consult and then tell them what will be the best possible tools that they can use.
Okay, I'm quite the newbie, but so what does that mean, right? To license or make tools, available. Does that mean that you're, empowering your clients to do that themselves, or you actually have a done for you kind of approach, or maybe a mix of both? I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a mix of both. There's a lot that a operator can do themselves.
Okay.
If you look at when we do pen testing on their particular applications to see if there's any vulnerabilities, if there are any weak points that a pirate can exploit to extract the content. So if it comes from their particular platforms, there are things that they can do to harden that to make it more difficult for the pirates to get access to it. And then you have other types of services which we provide on behalf of our customers. So that's piracy detection and enforcement, for example, where we will have a look and see, we'll crawl essentially the internet and have a look at what is available, what kind of content is available, and then remove that content. Work with social media platforms, search engines to remove that content. And the idea behind that is that, make it more difficult for the consumer to get access to the content in the particular region, and more likely for them to sign up to the legitimate offering.
Okay, super interesting. So in terms of that public awareness, right? So have we given up on kind of, educating people on what's legit, what's not? Again, I feel it's very absent, and I'm not saying we should do another version of that very intense. Was it the MPA who was doing that ad in DVDs that we were talking about? So what is being done in terms of policy making, and is there anything that can be done in terms of promoting, because those newer generation, do they understand the value and of a paid versus a pirated service? Do they even see the difference?
I think that is one of the areas where a little bit more attention could be spent on educating. As I mentioned before, for a consumer, it's starting to become quite difficult to distinguish between a pirate and a legitimate offering. So it is quite essential when we do a lot of consumer surveys, when we speak to the people. There's often people that says, if they knew that this was wrong, they wouldn't subscribe to those services. So it can have a positive effect by educating the consumers to try to teach them on, for one, how to distinguish between the two platforms, but also to the consequences of them pirating. Unfortunately, that money that is lost from the subscription cost means that there's less content that can be made. Right. So even on, from sporting, there's less money that goes into the sporting events and the teams and to fund that. But on, box office content or TV series content, there's also less money to be able to make good content. And that of course leads to a lot of job losses in the process as well.
Yeah, because the question is that can't be done, at company level alone. And so where I feel, the burden, so to say, should fall under, we have so many trade organization, in this industry. I'm actually surprised that it's not being still top of mind. No one will go at this alone. The level of collaboration will have somehow to go through a trade organization or then policy making. It was funny, my kids, because I still watch DVDs, it does happen, and so my kids saw that ad, so to say, and they were like, oh wow, and they really loved it. They were really into the music, etc. And I think the message is not moot. So somehow we got to think of a way to point, educate people on that. I think it's even more important now than never, especially because I feel we're at the time where we're controlling less and less the entry point to any piece of content.
Yeah, correct. Absolutely. Look, the consumption of that content has also changed significantly over the years. Some people, of course, would still go to the cinema to watch the latest, blockbuster. But a lot of the consumption is now happening at home, whether it's on a couch or, on mobile phones. But we see a lot of short form content too. So especially on social media platforms, they've made it really easy to publish content and to make it available to a very large audience. As a result, pirates have also started using those social media platforms to make And what they do of series content in particular, they will split it into smaller sections and then upload it onto the platform so that it's really easy to consume. They effectively use those social platforms to do the distribution for them. And of course, because that content starts to become really popular, the algorithms will then suggest it to more people, which means all of a sudden, there's a lot of a big audience that's being reached by.
Besides YouTube with a content ID, where you can either block and claim, or you can let it run its course, but it's going to be monetized. No other platforms is really doing anything on that front.
Meta has the Facebook Rights Manager, which can be used. It's similar to the YouTube Content ID. It is quite effective. If you look at the other platforms, there are some platforms which are currently in test. They have betas for that particular similar software, but we see a lot of platforms that don't have that ability. And even compliance sometimes is a bit problematic. So we try to liaise with those platforms as much as possible so that we do get a really fast takedown when we detect any of that content online. But it remains quite challenging on some of the platforms.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from you is that it's really not so much a tech issue, in the sense that the tech is here, the tech is getting better. It has to, because the pirates themselves are getting better. It's more of a business strategy focus, right? Companies need to put more focus on fighting piracy at the same time as they're pushing their streaming platform agenda.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's not just about, implementing some anti-piracy tools and then hope the problem will go away. It is effectively a change in the business strategy. Going forward, it needs to be a serious consideration to operators how they conduct their business to try to limit the consumption of pirated content.
So just to wrap this up, what could you share that is, a win for you, a win for the industry when it comes to piracy? Anything that comes to mind? And then I'm going to have the AI question. Can AI somehow, help you in this? I know you're laughing, but, again, this seems very tedious. So anything, that is is seen as tedious, I'm always thinking, is there anything AI can actually do? So any win that come to mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've recently combined quite a few of those different anti-piracy tools to effectively, to interrupt, especially on live sports, the streaming experience on piracy platforms. And what we do, and we've published a case study on this, what we did for World Cup Rugby is we didn't actually block all the streams that we detected immediately. We took a bit more of a strategic approach where we gathered all the intelligence and then we waited until later in the particular championship. So when it came to the quarterfinals, semifinals, and finals, and then we blocked a large portion of accounts that were used as a source for pirated streams. And that's had a great effect because it interrupted the streams for those particular pirate viewers during the live events, which frustrated a lot of those consumers. And a lot of them then subscribed back to the legitimate platforms so that they can have that reliability of watching the sports live.
Fascinating. Do you have data to back this up on the Rugby World Cup? I'd love to share that. I can actually put it in the show notes.
Absolutely. It's a case study that's published on our website.
Okay, cool.
And we can definitely add the link.
Cool. I'll link to that. Awesome. And so AI, the big question, that's not even the right word. I'm sure, machine learning, whatever, are you, making use of that? Do you see use cases where it can make, your work easier with more impact, etc.?
Yeah, definitely. Look, when we do, especially on piracy detection, when we have a look to see what content is out there and what's being shared, especially when it comes to things like live sports, where it's critical to take down the content as soon as possible. We often, in really popular events, get a lot of content that comes back by the crawlers. Also, our analysts that do manual searches. So there's a lot of results that come back. All of those results need to be validated. We need to confirm that it is indeed the content that is currently being broadcasted and that it is, copyright infringement. And we use machine learning and AI for that. to a large extent, and that makes the analyst jobs a lot easier, where they can then focus on trying to get enforcement and compliance on the content that is infringing. So there's definitely use cases on AI where it is really useful. It is unfortunately not at a stage where you can just click a button and then it happens for you, right? So the analysts still have a large role to play in managing that process, but it definitely does help with combing through the content to see what is infringing.
Awesome. Okay, so you're going to be at IBC in a few weeks' time. What is this event for you? How important is it, within your year as Irdeto, but also on the piracy and cybersecurity piece, at large?
Yeah, absolutely. IBC is one of our biggest events of the year, and of course our headquarters being based just outside of Amsterdam, it's particularly for Irdeto a very big event. Piracy have, over the last couple of years, the trend have been increasing, or the interest in anti-piracy have definitely been increasing at the event. So I'll be there, definitely looking forward to it. And
nice.
Speaking to our customers and new customers and operators from around the world.
Perfect. Awesome. So I will link to your website, and then people can, check you guys out and book a meeting if they want. Well, thank you so much for coming over. For everyone who's just joined us, thank you. This was, another edition of Streaming Made Easy. Talking to smart people about complicated topics, making everything easy. So I'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.